Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Priscilla Berg, and I am the Pure Storage Payer Specialist here. I'm responsible for all of our payer customers and prospects, helping them to adapt to the ever-changing environment in healthcare and helping them to create solutions to meet their specific needs. And I am delighted today to be joined by two special guests. Our first guest is Andrew Miller. He is the lead principal technologist for Pure Storage. He has been a customer and a partner of ours prior to joining Pure, managing and presenting on storage, virtualization, networking, and security in some of his prior roles. Andrew has explored the ransomware landscape deeply over the last few years and been presenting on the topics on multiple different formats as we're helping to educate our customers and prospects. And also Jeff Judy, who is the Chief Cloud Architect of Recovery Point Systems. Jeff has more than 2 decades of experience in both system architecture and administration, and with a particular focus on virtualized solutions. He has designed and built and deployed Recovery Point's cloud environment and has extensive experience with a broad range of storage applications and backup technology. So Jeff and Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Phil.
More than happy to. I think Jeff's is like the second or third or fourth. I'm losing count here. How many of this? So it's been great.
It's a good measure of a great partnership. So it's great to have you both back today. The topic today is going to be ransomware. And, ransomware in healthcare has evolved. It's grown. I think, last year we saw over 600 attacks just in the healthcare space alone. So in my role here at Pure, I'm talking to payers about how it affects them, what's the implications for their business. And, Andrew, I'll start with you. What are you seeing specifically in this space?
I think I'll start with a story. So this is a little while ago, but it was presenting on some of the Pure capabilities. And usually I'll go through like kind of anatomy of attack, defense in depth, then I'll get to what Pure does. At the very end of the meeting, someone who didn't know who they were was on Zoom, says like, "Oh, hey, I joined it. I'm the CISO." And I was like, that would have been really great to know at the beginning before we started talking, but still, I'm glad you're here. And the reason that he showed up was because the day before he'd gotten his new cybersecurity insurance premiums, and they were 5 times higher than they were previously. So to a little bit of like kind of what we're seeing, that's both payers, that's hospitals, even some other industries that I see, this keeps getting worse. And one of the ways it's being reflected is in a way that catches even ahead of an attack. You see a 5x increase in anything, you're paying a lot of attention. So where I go then from the nature of what's underlying this is the continued asymmetric nature of attacks. We build technology stacks as professionals. And each of these, we keep building them and it iterates really fast and things aren't slowing down. So that means there's continued new challenges with attack vectors. That is, of course, we're going to get later to cyber resilience and defense in depth. And it makes just practical sense. You don't want to be at your last line of defense all the time. So we keep adding more and more layers in. But the core drivers underneath aren't changing. And this is something when you mentioned, Priscilla, I appreciate the reference. I mean, you go back, Andrew Miller, Google ransomware for 6 to 8 years ago. Back then was talking about the impact of cryptocurrency and crossing jurisdictional boundaries, the number of things that attackers could go after. I can close my eyes and kind of see like the landscape of all the vendors in this space. It's so huge. So all those factors, for better or worse, aren't slowing down. And almost sometimes the discussion I have with people is like, starting out, there's not a silver bullet. We all know that. And this is more of settling in for the long haul and how do we bake this into our processes? Not in like we're resigned and we're apathetic and just life is awful, but like we have to be able to handle this on a continual basis because the underlying factors haven't run out of steam from an attacker standpoint.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that, as we're seeing in the industry, especially as organizations and healthcare are changing so dynamically and so quickly, things like mergers, acquisitions, there's a lot of failure points potentially within these systems.
Messy.
So
it's hard.
It's really messy. I mean, Jeff, when you talk to executives, what are they telling you? What are some of their concerns that they're bringing up to you?
Well, one thing's for sure, and that's really that the universal development out there is that ransomware attacks are the number one disaster event.
Yeah.
In the past, it was more of a traditional DR test and plan for weather events. But nowadays, that's really the pervasive theme, and it's in the headlines every day. So nobody's really escaping it and getting away from it. And it's across all industries. So and what it involves is a lot of incident response planning and testing is changing it to become more geared towards the incident response cyber attack and the instant response and what you need to do from that point. And that's really the main focus these days of the chief information security officer. You mentioned that like things are not slowing down, and that is really true for the CISO as well. They have to really pay attention to not just the production side of protecting your company, but how do you mitigate risk in other ways? And one way to do that, one way to really reduce risk is to know that you're recoverable, and how fast can you recover, and plan for the different scenarios.
So, and speaking of some of these scenarios, and just from a practical perspective, how are these playing out, Andrew? I mean, just what are you seeing? How do these go typically?
I'm just going to keep going down the story path because there's enough of these. And these aren't made up stories. These are real ones, but they are anonymized because they should be. Otherwise, people won't keep talking to me, kind of thing. So I'm going to want to keep almost pulling the thread of what I mentioned asymmetric nature, which makes me sound like I'm a college professor, like we're talking about asymmetric warfare. But it's the idea of, as professionals, we have to be right every single time, and the attackers have to be right once. Ooh, that's really, really hard, right? Kind of thing. So story number one. Now, this is a hospital. The day after the storage and backup and data center admin, who had a couple of different hats he was wearing, went on vacation. The attackers hit. They destroyed the backups. They trashed snapshots. And then, of course, they started doing the encryption phase of the attack and asked for ransom. Now, what happened underneath the covers, this is where it's very anonymous, is they'd actually gotten in when they did a root cause analysis post-mortem. The attackers had gotten in through actually an executive who clicked the wrong link, which isn't saying executives are bad. That's a human thing, okay, fine. Then from there, they actually penetrated into dumped the SAM and got, help desk passwords. That got them to Windows domain admin, and they pushed a keylogger to the storage admin's machine. And now they got the keys to the kingdom. They can see his calendar. They can log into the storage arrays, the backup systems, et cetera. So how do you protect against that? Because there's a human element. There's you're pivoting through multiple systems. Flip side story. This is actually a large manufacturing organization, and they actually had really good defense in depth from a cybersecurity standpoint, and actually chose not to implement certain protections that we've been discussing with them because they thought they had done a really good job, and they had. However, the attackers got in and got access to their IT operations password database. What does that do to you? At that point, literally access the whole thing. So now there's a challenging part of this story that they actually had some major downtime and financial impact that was even reported to Wall Street. That's why I'm making this so anonymous. But then actually they implemented some of the protections. This is where a little bit of light in the tunnel. We won't start dark for the whole beginning. They actually implemented some of the protections that we're going to get to later. They had another attack 30 days later, which is common. You should be ready for that because the attackers will leave in back doors and either use them again or they'll sell them out on the market. That's another way that they monetize attacks. That's part of the whole, ransomware value supply chain, if that doesn't sound too weird to say. And the second time they got attacked 30 days later, it was a non-event. Not that they didn't have to restore some stuff, but they knew how to recover. And also they had built better things underneath from an immutability, resiliency, clean room standpoint. So, Jeff, curious on your thoughts.
That that's actually, there is light at the end of the tunnel when you say it like that. You got hit, you got knocked down, but they've learned from it, they improved and iterated through and improved the processes. I'll say one thing is those attackers, they don't care about your budget cycles or if you're on holiday. In fact, they're looking for you to be on holiday first before they launch it. And that's that's really kind of the anatomy of attack. Is they get in, like you said, they maybe come in through a phishing email, end user clicks on a link, they land and expand, lateral movement pull the SAM domain out. And, once they're elevated in permissions, they're going right for your backups. And usually backups are a roadmap of where, your crown jewels of your company.
Next to everything. Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I see, where all the important data sets are. Let's go get those. But by the way, let's wipe out your backups too. And so at Recovery Point, we always stress having those backups, having that immutable copy of backups that are offsite is your last line of defense. And it's of utmost importance to maintain that.
And I think, something that you both alluded to and things that I've been talking to our payer customers about is the concept of, shifting to best practices for cyber resiliency. And you both mentioned a couple different aspects of cyber resiliency and specifically tiered resiliency. So, Andrew, who are you talking to? What are they saying? What's the shift here? What's that all about?
I'll keep going first. I promise, Jeff, I'll let you go first next time, or maybe later on. I don't know. It's all right. So I almost want to so yes, there's in any kind of landscape where there's a lot of challenge and frankly a lot of pain and a lot of visibility, we run the risk of buzzwords. Some are like, you're like, ooh, you're putting the buzzword on top of this, but I actually like cyber resiliency as one because it goes to cybersecurity and the classic IT perspective of defense in depth or IT security. Of course you have this usability, security spectrum kind of thing, but defense in depth, that's good stuff. So cyber resiliency reflecting that cybersecurity, we need multiple layers because our last line of defense needs to be really good. We don't want to be the last line of defense all the time. The other concept that I'll bring in often is mapping to NIST frameworks. And I'm almost a little careful there because if I talk about this and it seems like you don't know what you're talking about, people are like, oh, you're just saying NIST to sound smart. Well, but there's good stuff there to map to, even as there is a lot of depth you have to dig into in each area. So the 1.0 framework, and this would be for folks listening in, there is a 1.0 to a 2.0. So we're at the 1.0, I can kind of close my eyes and see the slide. It goes from like identify to protect to detect to respond to recover. The newer 2.0, which I actually like more, is that it actually shows govern in the middle and they're a circle kind of thing because you're actually going through this. It's not this linear flow. You may be in the recover phase and you're jumping back to respond, or when you're in detect, you're wanting back to protect. So it's this flow, or even maybe everything kind of crosses over each other. So one, looking at that part of the NIST framework and making sure that you have something that you've thought consciously about each piece of that. And you either have a product or a tool or a process. You've thought about all of those before you're into, now number 2, cyber resiliency. And that's where I often get to thinking about really a focus on the data, at least for what we do at Pure Storage. What a surprise. And so that's thinking about, okay, you have your primary data sets and how do you protect those? Maybe you have another tier that's either native replication with snapshots or it's using a backup partner. You've got another tier, you've got disaster recovery tier, and you need to have some protections applied on that so the attackers can't beat those up. And maybe even there's a data bunker. This is probably in the Fortune 500 or 100 space. It's kind of a one-way thing. I don't know if we'll wander around air gap later. We'll see or not. But so there's these multiple levels. They all have purpose, but you do have to be careful about not having huge duplication of infrastructure and so much operational overhead and cost that it's not even feasible. Am I setting up something that we're going to, provide answers to later? Well, yes, I am. But practically, you see people sometimes trying to apply these principles and getting stuck on cost and operational complexity. Now, Jeff, please.
So recovery point, we're a disaster recovery service provider. We own and operate our own data center. So that's just what we do all day long is recover clients, run through testing cycles. And probably the 3 points that we really work with clients on are it kind of goes in lockstep with the NIST framework, but it's preparation, recovery, and remediation. And probably preparation is the most critical piece to that process. If you prepare, if you have a test plan and you exercise that test plan, then you build that muscle, the strength in the recovery process. So when you do get attacked and that ransomware, you get encrypted and you lose data sets, you have that plan in place and your response can be fast. And you can recover data sets that you're prepared to recover quickly. And I would say, I'll touch on this maybe a little bit later, but the kind of stuff that you're talking about with complexity and operational requirements, you can't really go it alone. You need partnerships, you need vendors that have done this before and that have the proper technologies in place to be able to recover you quickly.
A little bit of all hands on deck sometimes, think of.
And Jeff, as you mentioned, it's really not, sometimes technology, we talk about recovery and, business interruption, but really we're talking about being able to actually do business at a payer organization. So if something like this happens, they can't provide authorizations, they can't pay claims, they can't interact with members. I mean, this is really having a business impact on an organization other than just the technology and the compromised data. So at RPS, your solution is enabling folks to return to operations more quickly. So tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing in the business and how customers can respond better in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the terms of, in a sense of cyber recovery, it's different. It's much different actually from a traditional disaster recovery. You really need, you're going to need a clean room to fail into. So oftentimes when it occurs, your production environment is down. It could be down hard where everything's locked up and you can't get to it. Or the authorities have come in and they've kind of, taped off the crime scene and you can't really touch those systems. So at that point, you need an alternate blade to fail into. And this kind of goes into where you need these partnerships, you need these DR providers that can do this for you. And also you need technologies in place can quickly recover you, like Pure Storage. So when you pair Recovery Point and Pure together, it's a really good match for clients. And we have many clients that actually use these technologies in our recovery systems today. So, what I'm talking about with the clean room is really an environment that truly is clean. There's really nothing in there and it's isolated. So when you restore systems into room, the process would be restore a system, do analysis on it. Is it infected? Is it completely encrypted? Yes. Throw it away. Go back to the next restore point. Check that system. Is it encrypted? Yes. Is it encrypted? No. Is it infected? Yes. Okay. Maybe we can use that if we can sanitize it. Now put that with Pure's multiple snapshot technology, and you could do both of those steps or multiple steps at once, and you quickly cycle through finding the data that's valid, that's still usable, promote that through the process, put it back, patch it, sanitize, patch, and restore back into production.
Well, and Andrew, I was going to ask you how Pure helps with that, but I think Jeff has covered. Would you like to add anything?
I know you have more.
If that's all right, so, and it's more because what I think is we provide foundational building blocks. And even this is, again, from the customer and partner side. What is a solution? Well, it wraps stuff more around. So you go further into the solution, even like you're saying, Priscilla, people need to get back to where they can do prior authorizations and claims, et cetera. But in this case, I'm going to take a little bit of liberty to focus on the data layer and the themes that I usually come to. And this is hopefully helpful for folks listening, whether they're thinking of Pure or not, is around the ideas of simplicity, immutability, resiliency, and speed. So I think this is going to layer in well with what you just said. Yeah. We'll see how it goes. And it's always kind of play this out in a before, during, and after an attack framework. So kind of before an attack, there has to be, like you're talking about, there has to be enough simplicity to set stuff up and maintain it. Because if it takes all this day-to-day operational overhead, it's not going to be there when you need it. Because how often are you recovering from a ransomware attack? Hopefully not very often. What happens, it's really bad. That's the definition of a high impact, low probability event. You don't plan for that with things that have high operational complexity, much less be able to do like the testing that you referred to. So before, simplicity, and I'm not mentioning Pure product names intentionally, kind of thing. During, knowing that even if the attackers have administrative access, I think we both alluded to this, but that's a really hard problem to solve for, that even if they have administrative access to the storage and the backup systems, that they can't do the final deletion of your data. So that sometimes gets the idea of immutability, even where resiliency comes in. That is where sometimes I'll talk about a specific feature with Pure called safe mode, which helps with that scenario. So even an attacker can do the final deletion of the data faster than a time set. And this is not Worm, which is more built for regulatory compliance, keep things for 3 or 5 or 7 years. Because you do that, and then you have things go crazy on your array, and you run out of space, and you got to turn off these very protections that you need. So it needs to be designed with enough operational flexibility in. Then, of course, the after, and I feel like I'm still following your framework, Jeff, but I hope I'm adding good stuff in. Is it's about speed of recovery. So, on a fundamental exercise, if a tree falls in a forest, do either of you care? I don't. Don't. But or does it make sound? But if the recovery, to what you said, Priscilla, takes so long, there's major operational, organizational, financial impact. All that work on action, it's almost like it doesn't exist in real life. That's really painful to think about. So there I go into either as Pure, we can help in the ways you mentioned, Jeff, either with almost instant recovery scenario that's moving snapshots around the metadata, or we can drive huge amounts of throughput with moving things through backup systems or recovery where the data has to flow between systems. We can dramatically accelerate that. Sometimes sweep cases where it's like 20 to 30x fastest. That makes a difference back to business.
So when somebody's coming up in a clean room, to operationally tell me how that works. So they get hit, they're contracted with RPS for clean room services. So I'm a customer. What is the sequence of events after?
As clean room, it's a stack of technology, and so Recovery Point, we recover multi-platform. We're talking mainframe, IBM i, AIX, x86. So we cover the entire but you blend in, like we were talking about earlier with tiering, you first blend in different DR technologies to be able to send the data over to your alternate site. Now, once you have that replication technology in place, then you got to exercise an incident response plan. And that's really where we get into the clean room, where it's isolated environment. It's tech stack. It could be x86. It could be some blend of mainframe, AIX, and your x86. I don't think we're getting into it today, but there's more complex scenarios where you've got cloud, and maybe you have stacks out in Azure. Maybe your dependency on some SaaS vendor. Those kind of scenarios are out there that we deal with every day. But, from a clean room standpoint, and you can still do a clean room out in the cloud as well, but send it to recovery, send your data stacks to recovery point. That's an isolated tech stack. And you work through restoration process with each system. Now, like we were talking about earlier, you can come back from a pure flash array snapshot, or that last line of defense is your recovery, your backups. And those can be sitting out on FlashBlade. We set up FlashBlade E architecture with object storage, and that's really where your backups can sit. Those are immutable. They can't be deleted. They can't be altered. That's your last line of defense. Once you recover these systems, you have to iterate through. So you're going to need a incident response vendor to come in, and a security provider that has the right tooling in place to be able to scan through these systems and sanitize them. Once that's done, you can eventually promote it back to production. Maybe patch the CVE 9.8 that was sitting out there that you never got around to, so that the 0 days or whatever are removed.
How the attacker got in and the incident response figured that out.
Close that hole before you put the system back out there. Yeah. And then you're good. I mean, it's not a process that a lot of times it can get messy, especially if you have no plan or very, very poor planning in place. It could take multiple days really to get yourself back into production. And we've got clients that recover to us. Maybe, we restored the data in just a matter of a few hours, but they still sat there with us for 60 days before they could get back to their own data center. So plan for those types of things.
The piece I wanted to highlight there, Jeff, I might have a little bit of a plus one, but briefly, not duplicating anything you said, is that sense for sometimes people not realizing that this is recovering not to production, like in a DR scenario where you do automation and testing and you push the button and bring things online, but it's to bring it into an offline environment, a protected environment as quickly as possible, like clean room, so that you can then go through and figure out, hopefully the incident response team from RPS, from other folks, is figuring out how the attackers got in, what they got access to clean out not even the data, but really the OS and the binaries. And that's not even just a one-time thing. That can be this restore iteration cycle, because we're trying to restore, and then we find, we're a couple hours in, it's like, oh, we found this new vulnerability, this new thing. We may have to start back over again. If every time we have to reset back whatever piece of the restore is a long progress bar that we sit and watch, ooh, that's challenging kind of thing. So that level of it's offline and there's iteration that you may need. And from a pure standpoint, like you mentioned, we can actually have, I'm thinking of a different hospital where they actually took, let's get really technical here for a second, kind of. The hospital, they took one data store that had 50 VMs on it. They made 10 different copies of that, which take 0 extra space, and 10 different teams worked on cleaning out 5 VMs each. And then they moved them into like the jump VM. This is some of that's a very manual way. You have much better automation than that, I know, as far as how you do it. But even the underlying pieces can help with that iteration cycle that you may very well need to do when recovering.
Yep.
And so I think that, so one of the themes that we've talked about, and as we started off the conversation that the two of you have spoken so many times, when I talk to our payer customers, they're not looking for pieces and parts. They're looking for a solution to a business problem that they have. And we've talked a little bit about how RPS provides a solution and Pure provides part of that solution. So just kind of in summary, what would you all say is the value from each one of your perspectives on why Pure and RPS are the better together for our payer customers?
I think I'll dive in first, Jeff, unless you want to. Hey, we planned this out there. It's a conversation. So I think of where I want to focus maybe is on the foundational capabilities. There has to be pieces that give you the underlying speed of restore. There have to be things that can help with the resiliency, the scenario around even if someone gets administrative access, heaven forbid they can't do the final deletion of the data, in the operational simplicity. So if you don't have good enough building blocks, you don't build your foundation out of good stuff. And I'm not trying to diminish what we do as Pure at all, but that's the foundation that RPS can leverage. And when I come back to around simplicity and immutability and resiliency and speed, that's a unique combination of capabilities. This is why I've talked about this a lot at Pure. I want and I need partners who can take advantage of that to bring it closer up to the customer. But I also believe that what we offer is this uniquely beneficial combination of things that is frankly very competitive out to the rest of the landscape. And that's why we partner well with RPS, because we then hand it off for what you do, Jeff. So that's my segue.
Thank you. I'll go back to you can't DIY this. You need partnerships. We work with enterprise clients that just have multi-platforms and distributed teams. Some are offshore, and there's just a lot of complexity around these environments. So you need partnerships and a provider that has been there and just does this every day for you. That's a starting. Now, if you're working with us and we're teamed up with Pure, it's a perfect match. I'll take you to a client that just recently switched over to Pure Active DR replication. So they use Commvault for backups, and they send those backups to Pure FlashBook. And that was a restore process. And it would take days. It would take us 4 days to recover. It was like 25 or 30 AIX systems. So they're like, okay, it's taken an entire, a massive amount of time. We're not achieving our recovery time objectives. Let's switch this over to Active DR. Guess how fast they recovered this? And I'm talking this week. They just ran this. It was 5 hours. Okay. It was basically just pod promotion, hook the AIX systems in, and you're online. And you're done, you're talking 4 days down to 5 hours.
The Pure pieces that are almost instant, and then there's some operational bringing online pieces. And
yes, that we tie all that together. So the technology Pure brings is high performance, and it's very successful. And then you wrap our skill sets around the disaster recovery services, and it's just a really good service to use.
I love the practical example, because I think I could call that like an order of magnitude almost. Yeah, that's the 10x. 10x is an order of magnitude.
It really is.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, we're going to take some questions, but before we does anybody want to offer any final thoughts before we move over to questions?
Jeff?
Well, I would say always have backups, have them off site, immutable, and test them frequently.
Good point. Yeah.
This is an all hands on deck scenario. I mean, these are potentially some of the worst days for you as a customer, if you're listening, kind of thing. And so having partners that understand this space, have, capabilities that have been tried and tested, because you don't want to DIY it. And I'll borrow your phrase. And that's not to like minimize anyone going to Home Depot or Lowe's or any great, like we're doing this at home, but in the sense of from a business standpoint, if we want to have reliable results, and can't believe we haven't really talked RPO and RTO. We're just assuming everyone knows about time to recover and how far back in time you have to go. If you want that to be reliable and guaranteed to the business, you have to have someone who knows how to do this well and have planned it ahead of time and tested ahead of time. So that's why I appreciate the partnership with RPS so much.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for your comments. I always learn a little bit every time I do one of these, so I appreciate your time. One of the questions that we got online was, and we kind of alluded to this at the beginning of the presentation, that everything's always changing all the time, right? So something's new, something's old, and there's a lot of confusion in the space. So, where are most people confused, and are the vendors making it worse? Vendor, I'll put that out there. So, full transparency, right?
Maybe I'll take a little bit of that first, Jeff, and then I'll toss it to you. So I always have to be a little careful, because I always want to appreciate and respect the audience. And sometimes people asking genuine questions like, that's the 10th time I've heard that one. So I'm going to channel those ones for the answering that to Priscilla. I think one of the common ones that I've heard is sometimes blurring, and even signs from vendors in the space, of the point of infiltration into a customer's environment versus the point of encryption, and what that means from a recovery standpoint at times. So this is, we're just trying to be educational. So the attackers get in. However they get in, they probably will, usually via humans, because we're the weak links. And then they sit in the environment for weeks and months and do active discovery, like you do for a data center migration, and map out all the systems. That's the point of infiltration. Then, they kick off the encryption phase of the attack. Like we've referred to today, now they're often trashing the backups and snapshots and the means of data recovery before they start encrypting. but that point of infiltration to encryption can be months, maybe a year apart. So can any business restore back to the point of infiltration at a theoretical level? No, we go out of business. We roll back the systems of
Yeah.
record 3 months, a month, like we stop running. So it's about rolling back as quickly as we can to the point of encryption, the clean room, the off room environment. And then from there, it's offline, we're cleaning up. But the key is that we want to get our data as close to right before the point of encryption as we can, even as we may need information logging and systems on some of that tiered resiliency, where we can go and dig into how the attackers got in. We may need that going back longer on less expensive means. That's part of tiered resiliency. But we can't recover at a business level back that far. And I see some vendors that kind of conflate that a little bit, and it leads to confusion. So, Jeff?
Yeah, there's a lot of different options out there and different approaches, but if you just take a look at what is successful for your business, it's going to help guide you in making the best decision on what kind of vendors will help you in that aspect of things, I think.
Excellent. The other question we have is, and I think you might have alluded to this initially, Andrew, air gap solutions. Is that a trendy thing? Is that a real thing? What are people talking about in terms of air gap solutions?
It is. I want to be good, Jeff. Do you want to go first? Or you want me to jump in first on this one? You tell me.
Well, I'll just say that, yeah, that's definitely not trendy. That is that is mainstream, Matt. We service tape and object storage. And really, people think tape is dead, but it's definitely not. It's alive and well out there. It's a very good cost-friendly solution for air gapping and keeping long-term archives of data. But object storage and immutability are mainstream. That's just not a trend. That's really, it's a very easy approach to be able to get your data offline. And a lot of backup vendors today they're well down the road with incorporating that kind of feature into their sets to be able to send the data offline up to a FlashBlade E and set those backups in those buckets to immutable. Like I said, so they can't be deleted, can't be altered.
The spot I always start is I try to be very careful with this because some folks have air gap on the brain. And so I almost always start with the classic, you get a question, you ask a question, right? So what does air gap mean to you? Especially just at a board level or executive level, it's like air gap is the solution, and they know that is a good term. Often, frankly, at a technical audience level, there's some cynicism around this because there's no like Tom Cruise style Mission Impossible, like dangling from the ceiling air gap. Like that's not what any of us do. There is some of this actually over in the federal space or military. That's where like there's skiffs and there's actually like real air gaps. Yeah. But in data centers, what we have, if anyone's even using the term, what it is more usually is a network gap that's a drawbridge, and it goes down and the data goes across and then the drawbridge goes back up. But it's really about adding, often when I kind of get the definition from people what they mean, it's adding some extra speed bumps along the way to slow down the attack. Because if the attackers are in for weeks or months, are they going to find the drawbridge and see when it goes down and up, especially if it's on a scheduled thing? Yes, they are. So that's where usually I try and kind of embrace the term. And this is now hopefully not losing credibility with folks out there. But when I go back to, we referred briefly to safe mode as a feature, I'll sometimes talk about that as a permissions air gap. Because what that allows you to do is it pulls away the initial removal of the data that then puts it in, say, a recycle bin for a certain amount of time from the final removal of the data, or we call it, you can destroy and eradicate. That's the precise terms in the pure GUI kind of thing. But it's permissions air gap to pull apart the permission of, I want this data to be deleted, from I can override a timer and make it go away right away. And in all of that, sometimes we all laugh about what air gap means, but if I've got an executive in the room, it's like, I can embrace that concept with a straight face too, because what we do provides some of the core things that people are often looking for when they say air gap, even if they don't know quite what they mean when they say it sometimes.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, of course.
Just, regarding like the dwell time, to be months to years, a way to mitigate that is like I said, to test, but you can scan the backups. So you're sending these backups to us as a provider. Those can be scanned offline. So we can, like a daily routine to take a look at these backups and do an investigation or interrogation into them with the scanning technology to look for any anomalies. That's one way to try to mitigate and get out in front of something that may have happened. Somebody may have breached, but they've yet to attack. Any factor or any angle that you could use to improve your posture defensively is probably worth it.
Well, and because we're talking about healthcare, I will wrap up with a very apropos final question is budget, right? So your organizations,
Yeah.
payers are always looking to save money. So where's the balance here? Do you have recommendations around budget constraints, and what are some best practices if you might be working under some?
I'll jump on that one first, if all right. So I think about with some of the approaches that I've seen over the years, and this is even before I've been at Pure. And actually, ironically, I don't know if this was supposed to link off the air gap question, but it's where my brain is going. Is we sometimes have kind of what was something called other scenarios, an isolated recovery or cyber recovery. It turned into large amounts of extra infrastructure with large amounts of professional services and operational overhead. I'm even aware of one customer that put some stuff in their data center for very high availability, and it added so much operational complexity that the operator took down the tier 1 application. That's just like really sad to think about. You do all this work and it becomes so much more operationally complex. You defeated the whole purpose. So where my brain goes, and now this is part of why I appreciate what we do as Pure, is when we talk about a tiered resiliency architecture, all of these tiers will often exist in the business for the reasons you have to have a primary spot to run your data that's low latency and high performance and does all the things that you need. You need some level of backups. You're going to have some level of disaster recovery. But to be able to layer on top without having to have whole duplicate infrastructure, but layer on top the ability to have immutability, resiliency, speed of restore, where those are capabilities that we add in versus whole separate set of infrastructures that we have to build. And that then helps majorly from a budget standpoint.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I'll say is it's best to, in the preparation phase of things, is to do a systems impact analysis, or you could do a more in-depth business impact analysis. But you have to really take a look at every system, how it maps to your data sets. And then you can start to tag which ones are most critical to your business, put a tier rating on those applications and data sets. So that kind of gives you this map or framework of what's most important to my company, and I can assign the most dollar amounts to that recovery portion of it. Whereas, if I throw say I just want to restore everything for replication, that's going to be a high dollar situation, a recovery service. And, it just might not fit with truly what's critical to your company. Another thing that you get out of running something like that would be you have these sets of data that you're aware of in when the attack does happen and encryption and data exfiltration occurs. And they start to say, hey, I want $1 million payment for this data set, the decryptor key. You can say, you only stole my tier 4 data sets, which I don't really care about. Maybe it's worth $10,000 to me. So you have that negotiation chip in your pocket too, with the knowledge of, where this data is, how critical is it to my company. And it maps into, your disaster recovery services. Do you need synchronous or asynchronous active DR replication, or can you just let those backups sit out on a FlashBlade object store?
Not one size fits all, and we have multiple options. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both very much for joining us today. And for those of you who are listening and you would like to know more, you can visit the Industry Insights section of both the purestorage.com webpage and Recovery Point's webpage to learn more about our clean room for payer solution. And as always, we're always happy to answer questions, both Recovery Point and Pure. So thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful day.